Captain Alan Foster stood in the grand hall of the Vorith command ship, surrounded by towering alien warriors whose scales gleamed like polished bronze under the harsh lighting. The air smelled of sulfur and victory. Around him, the Vorith commanders celebrated their recent triumph over the raider clans that had plagued their outer colonies for months. Alan had done his job well. Too well, perhaps. The defense strategy he designed had crushed the raiders in 3 decisive battles. Not a single Vorith colony fell. The Empire was grateful, and that gratitude made Alan nervous. Commander Throck, a massive Vorith with ceremonial battle scars across his chest, approached Alan with heavy footsteps that echoed through the hall. The alien's 4 eyes fixed on the human with an expression Alan had learned to read as pleasure. Captain Foster, Throck's voice rumbled through his translator device. You have served the Vorith Empire with great skill. Our people owe you a debt. Alan nodded politely. Just doing my job, Commander. The alliance between our people benefits everyone. Modest as always. Throck gestured to one of his attendants. But the Empire does not forget its friends. We have prepared a reward worthy of your achievement. Alan felt his stomach tighten. He had heard stories about Vorith rewards. The culture was old, traditional, and built on hierarchies that made him uncomfortable. But diplomacy required acceptance, at least on the surface. 2 Vorith guards entered through a side door. Between them walked a figure that made Alan's blood run cold. She was Kalari, her scales a deep emerald green that caught the light. She wore tattered clothing that had once been fine but now hung in strips. Heavy metal chains bound her wrists and ankles, connected by links that clinked with each shuffling step. Her head was down, eyes fixed on the floor. She moved like someone who had forgotten what freedom felt like. This is Lyra, Throck announced proudly. She is trained in many skills. Cooking, cleaning, translation, record-keeping. She will serve you well. Alan's jaw clenched. He wanted to shout, to refuse, to tell them exactly what he thought of treating sentient beings like property. But years of military discipline held his tongue. Starting an interstellar incident would not help anyone, least of all the woman in chains before him. Commander Throck, Alan said carefully, this is very generous. Throck beamed, mistaking Alan's tone for gratitude. She cost me much, but you earned it. Take her to your quarters on the human station. She will cause no trouble. The guards pushed Lyra forward. She stumbled, catching herself awkwardly with her chained hands. Still she did not look up. Alan noticed bruises on her arms, old ones fading and newer ones still dark. Thank you, Commander, Alan forced the words out. I will take her with me when I return to the station. The celebration continued around them, but Alan barely noticed. He gestured for Lyra to follow him, keeping his distance so she would not feel threatened. They walked through the ship's corridors in silence. She stayed 3 steps behind, head down, chains rattling. At the docking bay, Alan's shuttle waited. The human pilot, a young woman named Kate, looked up from her pre-flight checks and froze when she saw Lyra and her chains. Captain? Kate's voice was tight with anger she barely controlled. Not here, Alan said quietly. Get us back to the station. Fast. The flight took 20 minutes. 20 minutes of Lyra sitting on the floor of the cargo area because she seemed afraid to take a seat. 20 minutes of Alan trying not to show his rage. 20 minutes of Kate gripping the controls so hard her knuckles turned white. When they docked at the human diplomatic station, Alan led Lyra directly to his assigned quarters. The corridors were busy with humans and various alien diplomats. Several humans stopped and stared at the chains. Alan saw the same anger on their faces that burned in his chest. His quarters were simple but comfortable. 2 rooms, a bedroom and a living area with a small kitchen. Standard military housing for a captain on diplomatic assignment. Wait here, Alan said, his first words to her directly. Lyra stood motionless near the door, eyes still down. Alan went to his toolkit and pulled out a plasma cutter, normally used for equipment repairs. He adjusted the setting to the lowest power. I'm going to remove those chains, he said, approaching slowly. Lyra flinched backward, pressing herself against the wall. Her eyes went wide with fear, the first real emotion he had seen from her. Please, her voice was barely a whisper, rough from disuse. I will obey. No punishment needed. Alan stopped moving. His heart broke at those words. I'm not going to punish you. I'm going to free you. Free. She repeated the word like it was foreign. Humans don't own people, Alan said firmly. He knelt down, making himself smaller, less threatening. These chains are wrong. I'm taking them off. You're not my property. You're not anyone's property. Lyra stared at him, searching his face for deception. This is a test. No test. Just freedom. Alan held up the cutter. This will cut through the metal. It won't hurt you if you stay still. Do you understand? She nodded slowly, but her whole body trembled. Alan moved carefully, cutting through the chain between her wrists first. The metal fell away with a clang. Lyra gasped, pulling her arms apart for the first time in who knew how long. Her wrists were scarred, the scales damaged from years of rubbing. Next came the ankle chains. When the last piece of metal hit the floor, Lyra stood completely still, as if waiting for permission to move. "You're free," Alan said again. He gathered up the chains and threw them in the recycler. "Those are gone. Forever." "I don't understand," Lyra's voice shook. "Why would you do this?" "Because it's right." Alan moved to the kitchen area, giving her space. "Are you hungry? Thirsty?" She did not answer. She stared at her wrists, touching the scars gently. "The bedroom is through that door," Alan continued. "It's yours. I'll sleep out here on the couch. There are clean clothes in the closet. The bathroom is attached. You can shower, rest, whatever you need." "Mine?" The word seemed to confuse her. "Yours," Alan confirmed. "I'll order some proper calorie food. I don't know what your people eat, but I'll find out. If you need anything, just ask. If you want to leave, the door isn't locked. You can go anywhere on the station." Lyra finally looked up, meeting his eyes for the first time. Hers were gold with vertical pupils, currently wide with shock and disbelief. "Where would I go?" she asked softly. "My home planet fell 30 years ago. I was a child. I have been passed from owner to owner since then. I have no family, no credits, no skills your people value." Alan felt rage rise in his throat again, but he kept his voice gentle. "Then stay here until you figure it out. Not as property. As a guest. As a person making her own choice." Lyra looked at the bedroom door, then back at Alan, then at her bare wrists. A single tear rolled down her scaled cheek. She wiped it away quickly, as if crying was forbidden. "I don't know how to be free," she whispered. "Neither did I once," Alan said. "But we'll figure it out together." The first 3 days were the hardest. Lyra barely left the bedroom except to use the bathroom. Alan ordered food through the station's delivery system, researching calorie nutritional needs late into the night. He learned they needed more protein than humans and certain minerals found in specific vegetables. He made sure every meal included what she needed. He left the food outside her door, knocking gently to let her know it was there. Sometimes he heard her crying softly inside. He never mentioned it. On the 4th morning, Alan woke to find Lyra standing in the kitchen area, staring at the coffee maker like it might explode. She jumped when she saw him sit up on the couch. "Sorry," she said quickly. "I was thirsty. I should have asked." "You never have to ask for water," Alan said, rubbing sleep from his eyes. "This is your home too. Help yourself to anything." He showed her how the drink dispenser worked. She chose water, holding the cup carefully with both hands. Her wrists were healing, the constant rubbing from chains finally stopped. "I made too much dinner last night," Alan said casually. "There's leftover grain stew in the cold box if you want it." "You made it?" Lyra asked, surprised. "Yeah, I'm not a great cook, but I try." Alan grabbed his uniform jacket. "I have a meeting at 0800. Should be back by lunch. Make yourself at home." He left before she could retreat to the bedroom again. Small steps, he reminded himself. Trust took time. When he returned that afternoon, his quarters smelled clean. The dishes were washed. His scattered data pads were stacked neatly on the table. Lyra sat in the corner looking guilty. "I'm sorry," she said immediately. "I should not have touched your things. Old habits." "Lyra, you don't have to clean for me," Alan said gently. "You're not a servant here." "I know." She twisted her hands together. "But I have nothing to do. No purpose. It makes me feel useful." Alan understood that feeling. After his father died, he had joined the military because he needed purpose too. He sat down at the table, careful to keep distance between them. "How about this?" he said. "I have a lot of work to do. Strategic reports, defense analyses, boring military stuff. If you want something to do, you could help me organize it. But only if you want to. No pressure." Lyra hesitated. "I can read Galactic Common. That's more than enough." Alan pulled up a star chart on his data pad. "I'm reviewing supply routes for the Kelvin sector. Pirates have been hitting transport ships. I need to find the pattern." She moved closer, cautiously. Alan showed her the attack reports, each one marked with dates and locations. She studied them silently for several minutes. "May I?" she asked, reaching for the pad. "Of course." Her fingers moved quickly across the screen, sorting data by different variables. She pulled up trade schedules, shipping manifests, star charts. Alan watched her work, surprised by her speed and confidence. This was different from the frightened woman who barely spoke. These 3 attacks, Lyra said, pointing. They all happen during shift changes at the checkpoint stations. When one crew leaves and another arrives, there's a 15-minute gap in sensor coverage. Alan leaned forward, studying the timeline. She was right. He had missed it completely. And here, she continued, gaining confidence, the pirates only hit ships carrying medical supplies and high-grade electronics. They ignore food transports and raw materials. They're selling to someone specific, probably a colony cut off from legal trade routes. That's brilliant, Alan said, genuinely impressed. How did you see that so quickly? Lyra pulled back, her confidence fading. I studied logistics and supply chain management before I was taken. I was going to work for our Planetary Trade Authority. But that was a long time ago. Your training still matters, Alan said firmly. This is exactly what we needed. I have to report this to command immediately. Fear flashed across her face. Please don't tell them I helped. I'm not supposed to access military information. They might think I'm a spy. Lyra, you just saved lives. Transport crews who won't get attacked because we can fix the security gap. You should get credit for that. No, she said firmly. I'm Kalari. Former slave property. Nobody will believe I contributed anything valuable. They'll question how you got the information. It will cause you problems. Alan wanted to argue, but he saw the fear in her eyes. This wasn't the time to push. Okay, he said. For now. But someday people will know how smart you are. She went back to the bedroom but left the door slightly open. Progress, Alan thought. Over the next 2 weeks, Lyra became Alan's unofficial assistant. She organized his reports, caught errors in supply calculations, and spotted patterns he missed. Her mind was sharp, trained in systems thinking and analysis. She worked quietly, efficiently, and never asked for recognition. Other humans on the station started noticing her. Kate, the shuttle pilot, brought her fresh fruit one day. Heard you like the purple kind, Kate said with a smile. Lyra accepted it carefully, still unused to kindness. The station's medical officer, Dr. Chen, offered to check her old injuries. Lyra agreed, and the doctor treated her wrists with regenerative gel that would fade the scars. You're healing well, Dr. Chen said. Give it time. Alan noticed changes. Lyra smiled occasionally. She asked questions instead of just answering them. She sat on the couch instead of the floor. She started wearing the new clothes Alan had ordered, simple but comfortable items in colors she chose herself. One evening, Alan was reviewing a particularly complex defensive scenario for the border planets. 3 enemy fleets, limited resources, impossible choices. He had been staring at the same data for hours. You're missing something, Lyra said from across the room. What do you mean? She came to the table, something she rarely did without being asked. You're trying to defend all 3 planets equally. But look at the population centers, the strategic resources, the evacuation capabilities. This planet here, she pointed, has underground shelter systems. This one doesn't. If you concentrate forces here and here, you buy time for evacuation on the 3rd planet. Alan ran the numbers. Her strategy worked. Fewer casualties, better resource use, higher success probability. I need to send this to command, he said. And this time I'm giving you credit. Alan, no. Lyra, listen to me. He turned to face her directly. I won't lie to my superiors. This is your strategy. Your analysis. Your intelligence that saved lives. I'm putting your name on this report. They'll reject it because of me, she whispered. Then they're fools, Alan said. And they'll miss out on one of the best strategic minds I've ever worked with. He sent the report with both their names attached. The response came 6 hours later. Command approved the strategy with a note. Foster, who is this Lyra? Her analysis is excellent. Is she available for consultation on other projects? Alan showed Lyra the message. She read it 3 times, then looked up at him with tears in her golden eyes. They used my name, she said, voice breaking. They called my work excellent. Because it is, Alan said simply. She cried then, really cried for the first time since arriving. Not from pain or fear but from something else. Something like hope. Alan handed her tissues and made tea, giving her space to feel whatever she needed to feel. When she finally stopped, she looked exhausted but lighter somehow. Thank you, she said, for seeing me as more than chains. I never saw the chains, Alan said honestly. I only saw you. The summons arrived on a cold morning, 2 months after Lyra had come to the station. Alan was reviewing supply reports when his communicator flashed red, the color reserved for urgent diplomatic matters. He opened the message and felt his blood turn to ice. Commander Throck of the Vorith Empire formally accused Captain Alan Foster of theft of property. The property in question, Lyra. The Vorith demanded her immediate return and threatened to withdraw from the Human Alliance if their request was denied. The Galactic Council had agreed to hear the case in 1 week. Alan found Lyra in the kitchen, preparing breakfast. She had learned to cook human food and seemed to enjoy experimenting with recipes. She looked up, saw his face, and the spoon fell from her hand. "They're coming for me," she said. It wasn't a question. "The Vorith filed a formal complaint with the Council," Alan said quietly. "They want you back." Lyra sat down heavily, her legs seeming to give out. "I knew this would happen. I knew it was too good to be real." "Listen to me," Alan knelt beside her chair. "I'm not giving you up. The human delegation is backing us. We're fighting this." "Against the Vorith Empire?" Lyra laughed bitterly. "They've been practicing slavery for 10,000 years. It's woven into their entire culture. The Council won't side with one human over an empire." "Then we make them listen," Alan said firmly. "We show them who you are. What you've accomplished. We prove that you're a person, not property. And if we lose?" Alan met her eyes. "We won't." But he wasn't as confident as he sounded. The next week passed in a blur of preparation. Human lawyers arrived from Earth, specialists in interstellar law. They interviewed Lyra for hours, building her case. She told them everything, her voice steady even when discussing the worst parts. Her childhood on Kara before the invasion. Being sold at age 12. The years of serving different masters, some cruel, some indifferent, none kind. The media across the galaxy picked up the story. "Human steals Vorith property," read one headline. "Escaped slave sparks interstellar incident," said another. But some outlets took their side. "Person or property? Council to decide sentient rights," wrote a progressive Delian news service. Protest groups formed on both sides. On Earth, thousands marched demanding Lyra's freedom. On Vorith Prime, crowds called for human punishment. The alliance between their species, carefully built over decades, seemed ready to shatter. The night before the hearing, Lyra couldn't sleep. Alan found her on the couch at 3 a.m, staring at nothing. "What if I freeze?" she asked. "What if I can't speak in front of the Council? What if they ask me something and I panic?" "Then I'll be right there," Alan said. "You won't be alone." "Why are you doing this?" Lyra turned to face him. "You could return me, apologize, save the Alliance. Your career would be fine. Instead you're risking everything for someone you barely know." "I know you," Alan said simply. "I know you're brilliant and kind and brave. I know you laugh at bad jokes and cry at sad movies. I know you deserve freedom as much as any human. That's enough." Lyra wiped her eyes. "If we lose, promise me something. Anything. Don't blame yourself. You gave me 2 months of freedom. 2 months of being treated like a person. That's more than I've had in 20 years. Whatever happens, thank you for that." Alan couldn't respond. His throat was too tight. The Galactic Council chamber was enormous, designed to hold representatives from hundreds of species. Translators buzzed in the air, converting thousands of languages simultaneously. The Council itself sat on a raised platform, 12 beings from the oldest and most powerful civilizations in known space. Alan and Lyra sat at the defendants' table with their legal team. Across the aisle, Commander Throck and his lawyers prepared their case. The Vorith commander stared at Lyra with barely concealed anger. The chief counselor, a floating gas form being from Nexera, opened the session. "We gather to hear the matter of Lyra, Kalari female, claimed as property by the Vorith Empire and currently held by human Captain Alan Foster. Commander Throck, present your case." Throck stood, his scales gleaming under the chamber lights. "The case is simple, honored council. Captain Foster was given property as payment for services rendered. He accepted this property. Under Vorith law, ownership transferred to him. He then released this property without authorization, violating our cultural practices and the sanctity of contract law. The property in question is a sentient being," the human lawyer, Sarah Mitchell, countered. "Human law forbids ownership of sentient life. Captain Foster was morally and legally obligated to free Lyra the moment she came into his care. Human law does not apply to Vorith property," Throck argued. "Many species practice forms of servitude. The Council has never interfered before. To do so now would be cultural imperialism. The debate raged for hours. Legal precedents were cited. Cultural practices were defended and attacked. Through it all, Lyra sat silently, listening to beings argue about whether she was a person or a thing. Finally, the chief counselor raised a tentacle for silence. We will hear from Lyra herself. Let the subject of this dispute speak. Lyra stood slowly. Her legs shook. Alan wanted to hold her hand but knew it might appear as though she couldn't speak for herself. She walked to the central platform alone. State your name and origin, the counselor instructed. I am Lyra of Kalra. Her voice came out stronger than Alan expected. I was born in the southern continent in a city that no longer exists. Do you wish to return to Vorith custody? No. The word echoed through the chamber. I wish to remain free. Throck stood abruptly. The property does not get to choose. I am not property, Lyra said, turning to face him directly. I am a person. I had a family. I had education. I had dreams before your empire's allies destroyed my world and sold the survivors. You were purchased legally under Vorith law, Throck insisted. I was 12 years old, Lyra's voice rose. I was a child. I held a degree in systems engineering from the Kalra Technical Institute. I was starting my career when the invasion came. 20 years, Commander. 20 years of serving masters who never asked my name, never cared about my thoughts, never saw me as anything but a tool. She turned back to the council. Captain Foster freed me. He gave me back my name. He let me use my mind again. I have helped develop defense strategies that saved lives. I have contributed to projects across the human station. I am a person, and I am asking you to recognize that. The chamber erupted in argument. Some species shouted support. Others demanded order and tradition. The council members conferred in their private channel. Commander Throck played his final card. If the council sides with the humans, the Vorith Empire will consider it an act of theft. We will withdraw from all alliances with species that support this decision. It was a threat that couldn't be ignored. The Vorith military was powerful. Their trade routes were essential. Losing them would destabilize entire sectors. Sarah Mitchell stood. If the council sides with slavery, humanity will withdraw from any organization that treats sentient beings as property. We will offer asylum to any enslaved person who reaches human territory. We fought a war on Earth to end this practice. We will not accept it among the stars. The chief counselor raised multiple tentacles. This matter requires deep consideration. We will recess for deliberation. All parties will return tomorrow for our decision. That night Alan and Lyra sat in their quarters, exhausted and terrified. The whole galaxy seemed to be watching, waiting to see if one person's freedom was worth the cost. Whatever happens tomorrow, Alan said quietly, you spoke your truth. You stood in front of the most powerful beings in the galaxy and demanded they see you. That took more courage than any battle I've fought. Lyra leaned against his shoulder, something she had never done before. I'm scared. Me too, Alan admitted. But we're scared together. Outside their window, ships from 100 worlds orbited the station, all waiting for the council's decision that would change everything. The news of Lyra's testimony spread across the galaxy faster than anyone expected. On planets where slavery was legal, servants and workers watched the broadcasts in secret. They saw a chained woman stand before the most powerful beings in known space and demand recognition as a person. Within days, small acts of rebellion began. On the Vorith homeworld, 3 servants disappeared from a noble household. On Krell Station, workers refused orders and demanded payment instead of food rations. On distant mining colonies, enslaved beings sabotaged equipment and fled into the wilderness. The revolts were not large or organized. But they were everywhere, sudden sparks that slave-holding societies couldn't ignore. The message was clear. If Lyra could demand freedom, so could they. Alan discovered this when a young Delian diplomat named Kess approached him in the station corridor. The Delians were a newer species in galactic politics, only 200 years into space travel. Captain Foster, Kess said nervously, I wanted you to know that my delegation supports your position. We will vote with humanity when the council reconvenes. Thank you, Alan said, surprised. I didn't expect that. The Delians have stayed neutral on most social issues. My grandmother was born into servitude, Kess explained. Our people abolished the practice 60 years ago, but we remember. We know what it means to be considered less than a person. Lyra's courage reminds us why we made that choice. More allies emerged. The Tyrillian ambassador, whose species had never practiced slavery, offered legal support. A group of independent traders, many of them refugees from various conflicts, started a fund to help freed slaves find work. Even some younger Vorath, born after the Empire's expansion wars, quietly expressed support for reform. But support also meant danger. It happened 3 nights before the council was set to vote. Alan and Lyra were walking back from a strategy meeting with the legal team. The station corridors were less crowded at night, most beings already in their quarters. They turned a corner and found 3 figures waiting. Hooded, faces hidden, weapons visible. Alan recognized the build of Vorath warriors immediately. "Step away from the property, human," one of them growled. "This doesn't concern you." Alan moved in front of Lyra. "She's not property. And you're making a mistake." "The mistake was yours," another attacker said. "You've caused chaos across the Empire. Servants refusing work. Property demanding rights. This ends tonight." The first attacker raised a plasma pistol. Alan dove sideways, pulling Lyra with him. The shot burned through the air where they had been standing, scorching the wall. But Lyra didn't freeze. 20 years of survival instincts kicked in. As Alan grappled with the first attacker, she grabbed a maintenance tool from a nearby panel and swung it hard at the second attacker's knee. The Vorath warrior collapsed with a roar. The third attacker came at her, but Alan broke free and tackled him. They crashed into the wall, trading blows. The attacker was stronger, but Alan was faster. He got an arm around the Vorath's neck and squeezed until the alien went limp. Lyra stood over the second attacker, the tool raised defensively. Her scales were flushed dark with adrenaline, her breathing hard. "Behind you," she shouted. Alan spun. The first attacker had recovered and was aiming his weapon again. But station security burst around the corner, weapons drawn. The attackers were surrounded. "Drop your weapons," the security chief ordered. "Now." The attackers complied, knowing they were beaten. As security led them away, Alan turned to Lyra. She was shaking, the tool still gripped tight in her hand. "You okay?" he asked. "I fought back," she said, wonder in her voice. "Someone tried to hurt me and I fought back." "Yeah, you did." Alan gently took the tool from her hand. "You saved my life." "Partners," she said. "Like you said. We protect each other." The assassination attempt backfired spectacularly. News of the attack spread immediately. Public opinion shifted. Even species that had been neutral expressed outrage that violence was used against someone petitioning for basic rights. The council reconvened in an atmosphere of tension and expectation. The chamber was packed with observers from across the galaxy. Security had tripled after the attack. Before the vote, the chief counselor allowed final statements. Commander Throck stood and spoke about tradition, cultural sovereignty, and the dangers of outside interference. His words were powerful, and some council members nodded in agreement. Then the human ambassador, an older woman named Patricia Wells, rose to speak. She had been mostly silent during the proceedings, letting the lawyers handle the legal arguments. But now she commanded the room. "I want to tell you about Earth," she began. "About 400 years ago, my ancestors practiced slavery. Human beings owned other human beings. We told ourselves it was natural that some people were meant to serve. We built entire economies on stolen labor and stolen lives." The chamber grew quiet. This was not typical diplomatic language. "We fought a war over it," Ambassador Wells continued. "Millions died. Our world nearly tore itself apart. But we ended it. We looked at the practice of owning people and decided, collectively, that it was wrong. Not just legally wrong but morally wrong. Wrong in a way that could not be justified by tradition or economics or cultural practice." She turned to face the council directly. "Since then, humanity has sworn never to accept slavery again. Not for humans and not for anyone. When we met other species and learned that some still practiced this, we were horrified. But we understood it was not our place to force change on your worlds. However," her voice grew stronger, "when a person comes to us, when someone asks us for freedom, we will not turn them away. We will not return them to chains. We will not pretend that sentience comes in degrees, that some beings deserve freedom while others deserve servitude." She gestured to Lyra. "This woman has proven her intelligence, her capability, her personhood beyond any doubt. She has contributed to projects that saved lives. She has spoken eloquently about her experiences and her hopes. She has demonstrated courage in the face of threats and violence. If the council cannot recognize her as deserving of the same basic rights we claim for ourselves, then what does this council stand for?" Ambassador Wells looked at each council member in turn. "Vote your conscience. But know that humanity will remember this decision. We will remember who stood for freedom and who stood for chains. We will remember who saw a person and who saw property. She sat down. The chamber remained silent for a long moment. The chief counselor began the vote. All in favor of granting Lyra of Kara asylum and legal recognition as a free being indicate now. Lights appeared on the voting board. Blue for yes. Red for no. Yellow for abstain. The humans voted blue immediately. The Delians followed. The Trillians. Species after species made their choice. Some voted red, unwilling to challenge the practice in their own territories. Others abstained, afraid to take a position. But slowly, more blue lights appeared than anyone expected. Younger species remembering their own struggles. Trading partners who depended on human commerce. Even 2 Vorth Council members, rebels within their own society. When the count finished, the result was clear. 8 blue, 3 red, 1 abstain. The council recognizes Lyra of Kara as a free being, the chief counselor announced. She is granted asylum in human territory. No species may claim ownership or demand her return. The chamber erupted. Some cheered. Others protested. Commander Throck stormed out, his scales dark with fury. But none of it mattered to Alan and Lyra. They sat together, holding hands, tears streaming down both their faces. It was over. She was free. Not just physically but legally, officially, in a way that even empires would have to respect. We won, Lyra whispered. You won, Alan corrected. You stood up for yourself and changed the galaxy. Outside the chamber, enslaved beings across hundreds of worlds heard the news and began to hope. 6 months after the council's decision, Alan stood in the newly established Human Rights Office on the diplomatic station and barely recognized his life. What had started as quarters for one captain had grown into an entire department dedicated to helping freed beings adjust to life beyond servitude. Lyra sat at her desk across the room, speaking calmly to a frightened Quellan male who had escaped his masters 3 days ago. The Quellan's tentacles trembled as he explained his situation through a translator. Lyra listened with patience, taking notes, asking gentle questions. We'll find you safe housing, she assured him. And we have job training programs. What skills do you have? I cleaned, the Quellan said quietly. For 30 years I cleaned. That's a start, Lyra said. But what did you want to do before you were taken? The question seemed to surprise him. I wanted to be a teacher. I loved mathematics. Then we'll help you become a teacher, Lyra said simply. It won't be easy. You'll need to catch up on your education, learn new systems. But if you want it, we'll help you get there. The Quellan's tentacles stopped shaking. You really mean that? I really mean that, Lyra confirmed. I was enslaved for 20 years. Now I help others find freedom. If I can do it, so can you. Alan watched her work with pride and something deeper, something he had been feeling for months but only recently admitted to himself. Somewhere between removing her chains and fighting assassins together, he had fallen in love with her. Not because she needed saving but because of who she was. Brilliant, compassionate, stronger than anyone he had ever known. After the Quellan left with temporary housing arrangements, Lyra stretched and yawned. She caught Alan staring and raised an eyebrow, a gesture she had picked up from humans. What? She asked. Just thinking about how far we've come, Alan said. We've processed 43 cases this month alone, Lyra said, checking her data pad. More beings are fleeing slavery every week. The council's decision gave them hope, but it also made things more dangerous. Masters are cracking down, increasing security. Which is why we need more resources, Alan said. I have a meeting with the human delegation next week to request additional funding. Can I come? Lyra asked. I want to present the education program proposal. These beings need more than just freedom. They need skills, purpose, a way to build new lives. Of course, Alan said. You're better at presentations than I am anyway. It was true. Lyra had discovered she was a natural speaker, passionate and clear when talking about issues she cared about. She had given interviews to news services across the galaxy, become a voice for the enslaved and newly freed. Some beings called her a hero. She always corrected them. I'm not a hero, she would say. I'm just someone who got lucky and wants to help others get the same chance. That evening they walked to the station's observation deck together. It had become their routine, a quiet moment after long days of work. They stood by the large windows, watching ships come and go against the backdrop of stars. Do you ever regret it? Lyra asked suddenly. Your career was so different before. You were a military strategist. Now you run a refugee office. Best career change I ever made, Alan said honestly. The military taught me how to fight. This work taught me what's worth fighting for. Lyra smiled, that real smile that had taken months to appear. You're such a human. Always dramatic. Says the Kalari who gave a speech that made half the council cry. They laughed together, comfortable in a way that came from shared struggles and deep trust. Alan reached out and took her hand. She laced her fingers through his, her scaled skin warm against his. I've been thinking, Alan said carefully. About us. Us, Lyra repeated, her tone unreadable. Yeah. I know we started as captor and captive even though I never wanted that. Then we became roommates, then colleagues. But lately I've been feeling like we're something more. Like what? Alan took a breath. Like partners. Real partners. In every way. Lyra was quiet for a long moment, looking out at the stars. I've been feeling that too, she admitted. But I was afraid to say it. Afraid you were just being kind because you felt responsible for me. I don't feel responsible for you, Alan said firmly. I feel honored to know you. To work beside you. To share my life with you. She turned to face him fully. I love you, she said, the words clear and certain. Not because you freed me but because of who you are. Because you see me as an equal. Because you make me laugh. Because when assassins attacked us, we fought as one. I love you too, Alan said. Have for months. Just didn't know if it was too soon, too complicated. Everything about us is complicated, Lyra said. But that doesn't make it wrong. They kissed then, a gentle meeting that felt like coming home. When they pulled apart, both were smiling. So what now? Alan asked. Now we keep working, Lyra said. Keep fighting for others. But we do it together as partners in every sense. I like that plan. 2 weeks later, a Kalari ship arrived at the station. It was small, battered, carrying refugees from a fallen mining colony. Among them were 3 other Kalari, survivors like Lyra. She met them at the docking bay, her heart pounding. The oldest was a male named Torin, scales faded with age. When he saw Lyra, his eyes widened with recognition. Little Lyra, he said in their native language. From the southern continent? Uncle Torin? Lyra's voice broke. You're alive? They embraced, 2 survivors of a destroyed world finding each other against impossible odds. Torin had been a teacher at her school. He remembered her as a bright child with endless questions. She had thought all her people were dead or scattered beyond finding. There are more, Torin said. Small communities on different worlds. We've been searching for each other, trying to rebuild what we lost. Then help me, Lyra said. Help me create something new. A network for Kalari and other displaced species. A way to preserve our cultures while building new lives. You're not just surviving, Torin said with pride. You're leading. I learned from the best, Lyra said, glancing at Alan who waited nearby. Come, let me show you what we're building here. 1 month after that, a young Dracian female named Kira arrived at the Wright's office. She had escaped from a pleasure house, her body covered in scars, her eyes haunted. She sat across from Lyra's desk, shaking so hard she could barely hold the cup of water Lyra offered. I heard about you, Kira whispered. They said you were property once. That you got free. I did, Lyra confirmed. And so can you. But I'm nothing, Kira said. I have no skills. No education. I'm just used. Lyra came around the desk and knelt beside Kira's chair, meeting her eyes at the same level. Listen to me carefully. You are not property. You are a person. What was done to you was wrong, but it doesn't define your worth. You have value because you exist, because you're sentient, because you deserve dignity and freedom. How do I start? Kira asked. 1 day at a time, Lyra said. First we get you safe housing. Then we help you heal, physically and emotionally. Then, when you're ready, we help you figure out who you want to become. There's no rush. Take all the time you need. Did someone tell you that once? Kira asked. Lyra smiled. Someone showed me that. By treating me with respect when I had forgotten what respect felt like. By giving me space to find myself again. Now I do the same for others. She helped Kira to her feet. Come on. Let me introduce you to people who understand what you've been through. You're not alone anymore. As they walked through the office, past other freed beings working or studying or simply learning to be free, Alan watched Lyra with amazement. She had transformed from a terrified woman in chains to someone who gave others hope. That night, in the quarters they now officially shared, Alan and Lyra reviewed the day's cases. The work never stopped. More beings escaped slavery every week. Some made it to human territory. Others were captured and punished. The fight was far from over. Do you think we'll actually end it? Alan asked. End slavery across the galaxy? Maybe not in our lifetime, Lyra said. But we'll save who we can. We'll give them the chance I got. And maybe, slowly, we'll change enough minds that future generations finish what we started. That's a long fight. Good thing we're in it together, Lyra said, taking his hand. Through their window, the galaxy stretched endless and beautiful. Somewhere out there, beings still lived in chains. But somewhere too, others were breaking free, inspired by one woman who stood before the most powerful beings in space and demanded to be seen as a person. The work continued. The fight went on. And two partners, bound not by chains but by choice, faced it together.